All right, let's talk a little bit about the style of Old Man in the Sea. Ernest Hemingway was one of the most famous authors of his time, and he was well known. He was part of the Lost Generation, so we're going to be talking about this more throughout the year. The Lost Generation happened um, during World War I to World War II, and it is called modernism. Okay, it started with German Impressionists in the arts, and they used a concept called Dadaism. You might recognize that term from AP Euro, but it's really about nothing, right? So what happened was is this generation basically didn't feel like anything mattered because they had the World War that they contended with. They dealt with a pandemic. They dealt with all of these things that talked about how they were, you know, not really that important. Okay. And so when we look at the Lost Generation, some of the greatest literature came out of this movement, but it's also not very positive. And you might notice that most English choices are not very positive. A lot of times it's kind of depressing. But Ernest Hemingway definitely was one of the most well-known authors in this modernist period. His best friend was F. Scott Fitzgerald. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby, which we'll be reading later on in this year. But they were best friends. And the difference between F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway is simple, if you really look at their lives. Hemingway got married 4 times, cheated on all of his wives. He kind of didn't really have a great love. I mean, you might argue that that's a better love life than being with one person. I don't really know, but the whole idea is he did not understand relationships and he always messed them up. All right. Whereas F. Scott Fitzgerald was married to one woman. Her name was Zelda. She was very wild. Okay, but and she rejected him a lot, but he still was with her, and it was the love of his life, and they stayed together. Okay, so that juxtaposition is really important. The other thing is Hemingway's writing style is that he's very sparse and short. Okay, his training is journalism, so he was very succinct in his writing, and so the writing that you have in Old Man in the Sea is very descriptive, but it's not drawn out. It's very short, sweet, to the point. Okay, um, so he had poetry known as I think it's a small 6-word poem. So and this is one of his most famous poems. It's 6 words, and it goes like this: baby shoes for sale, never worn. Just kind of take that in a little bit. Baby shoes for sale, never worn. With those 6 words, you have a whole story. And you can interpret that story in a way that you see fit. But it's interesting how he says the least amount of words possible and you get the most out of it. So his structure and style is very journalistic. It's very to the point. He used different allusions like Joe DiMaggio and all-American kind of things. All right. One of the most poignant things about not the next generation, that's Star Trek, about the Lost Generation, is that all of the men in this writing period, they all went to the Great War, World War I, and they all became men. You know what I'm saying? It's that whole machoism thing. And Hemingway is known for his machismo. Okay, he lived in Key West, and he also lived in Cuba for a long time. And he definitely had this kind of ideology of being a man's man. So a lot of the imagery that you're going to see deals with that. There is Christianity and that imagery, the image of 3, okay? And that's important. If you know anything about Christianity, there's, a Trinity, which is the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The number 3 is throughout Christianity as a religion, and so he kind of took that into account. The old man is a Christ figure. He's a sacrifice. Okay, so when we look at tragedy and what that means, that whole concept of that Christian sacrificial lamb, if you will. Okay? And so as you're reading through this, you can see that he has hope throughout the whole book, but once he's by himself and he's fighting the swordfish and he's trying to get this to catch the swordfish, it's just all odds are against him. He's trying everything. And he goes in and out of consciousness. It's like this, last ode to life, if you will. This was one of Hemingway's last books. He did not have a very happy life at the end. He was in a very tragic plane crash. His wife and his fourth wife and him survived, but they had really bad injuries. And then he was put into a mental hospital because he dealt with depression and paranoia. And unfortunately, he got electric shock treatment, which I don't know if you know what that is, but they pretty much put shocks in your head and it erases most of your memory. And so he was not in a good place. And unfortunately, he took his life at the end of his life. And he was frustrated because he couldn't remember what he wrote, even though he had all these books under his belt. A lot of this is a mirror to the old man. The old man was losing hope and making that happen. So when I'm showing you Secondhand Lions, I want to let you know that this movie, even though it totally is not a tragedy, it's actually a heroic movie. It's about two heroes. It has the same components. The lions on the beach, that imagery in Old Man in the Sea is kind of strange because a beach is not where you usually see lions, okay? Secondhand lions, kind of like they're used goods, if you will, okay? But lions are still regal, they're still powerful. It doesn't matter what environment you put them in. So this concept of having this pride and this knowledge and wisdom and how it's still used in their everyday life is important. So as you're reading Old Man in the Sea, look for those motifs. We're going to be talking about a couple major themes. There's going to be 5 of them. Man can be destroyed but not defeated. Pride and determinations are the sources of greatness. A worthy opponent brings out the best in a warrior. Fortune plays a significant role in one's life, and people should depend on themselves, not outside forces. So we're going to be seeing clips of Secondhand Lions, and I'm going to be talking about those themes in conjunction with Old Man in the Sea and those things. This is the longest episode we're going to have, so thank you for listening.